Welcome to the Unearthed Man podcast, the journey of becoming a conscious man. Hey all, Stephen here, and welcome to episode 71 of the Unearthed Man podcast. I enjoyed the chat with Zach last week. I thought he brought a different perspective on masculinity, particularly his views on ancient tribal practices. I love the diversity of the guests who have agreed to come into the podcast. I was scrolling through Instagram recently and came across a post from First Peoples Victoria. What I read shocked me. The post was all about the abuse they have been receiving recently in the comments on their posts from non-Indigenous people. The comments were simply disgraceful. I will not go into them, short of saying they effectively supported the genocide of the First Nations people here in Australia and referred to them as second and third-rate citizens. Now, I'm going to be really honest. I can't believe how this type of behavior still exists, and it's evident that this is learned generational behavior. No wonder our Indigenous brothers and sisters are exhausted from enduring racial abuse daily. We've got to educate ourselves regarding people of colour and race and understand that we are all equal. So on this point, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this unceded land and pay respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Surf Coast Wellness Rooms, based in Torquay, Victoria, Australia. You know, as men, we've spent a lot of time looking after everyone else and caring for a whole lot of other people, but we spend little time caring for ourselves. So you now have an opportunity to change all that. Using the code TheUnearthedMan10 when booking, you'll receive a 10% discount on any of their services, including float tanks, infrared saunas, massages, and salt therapy. It's great to use before or after a day at the beach. You can find a link to their website and the code below. Now, here are a few things to go through before we kick off today's guest. The Unearthed Men community comprises men willing to support and be supported by other men, and it continues to grow. So if you're a man or know of a man who's seeking his tribe or his community, then please use a link in the show notes below to sign up. Alternatively, you can message me via any of my social media channels. Secondly, please subscribe to the podcast via your preferred app and leave a review. The quickest way to enable the podcast to become more accessible worldwide is to receive a 5-star review. And also by doing this, you're acknowledging and thanking my guests for their time, effort, and wisdom. And finally, if you're a man who's had enough of feeling angry, having arguments with your partner and children, and reverting to ways of avoiding the pain of dealing with your emotions, then reach out so we can have a chat. Expressions of interest for my 8-week men's empowerment program are now open. I'm only taking 10 men into each 8-week program this year, so if you are interested, click the link below to join the waitlist as it is filling fast. Now, on to today's episode. My guest today had his first transcendent meditation experience at 13. Since then, he's been a disciple under the greatest Buddhist masters of our time. As a 25-plus martial arts teacher and practitioner, he brings the value of embodied teachings and philosophies of the East and his direct experiences through meditation into his coaching and vision for impacting the world. As a serial entrepreneur, he aspires to bring his practical business experience and spiritual and contemplative background to help shift the world in the most inspirational and connected world possible. His business, Breakthrough Coaching, is focused on helping purpose-driven high performers excel. He uses evidence-backed methodologies to facilitate alignment with his clients' vision and goals to make them easily attainable, eliminating burnout and procrastination and imbalance. Welcome to the Unearthed Man podcast, Tim Bowie. Did I say that right? Is it Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
No problem, though.
How are you, Tim?
Yeah. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on the show. And as we were discussing a little bit earlier, the one thing that really intrigued me is the transcendent meditation experience at the age of 13. That's probably very uncommon, I would say, for people to go through that experience. So just out of interest, can we sort of head straight down into that pathway and sort of understand, what those look like for you? Like what was that part of, you growing up? Was it, was your family into meditation and everything else? Or, what led into that experience?
Yeah, I grew up in a Buddhist household, but we weren't really big into meditation. It was just more of this sort of generational type of cultural Buddhism where kind of, pay respects to your ancestors, like in Mulan. And I don't know, that was a really random reference, but yeah, it's like Mulan. And so there's not a lot of like spiritual practices. It's just kind of just, I don't know, to me, a little superstitious stuff. Um, but I was curious about meditation because I had heard about it and I was listening at some of the influences I had at the time was like Dr. Wayne Dyer and Bruce Lipton. Or is it Bruce Lipton? Yeah. So,
Yep.
just some more Western people that actually introduced me to this idea. And I didn't know how to do it. So I just looked it up on Google. How do you meditate? And then they showed me, okay, there's different ways. And so I just tried one way and I tried it less than a handful of times. And I had basically an out of body experience where like time just stopped. Like I didn't feel like I didn't need to breathe anymore. Like each breath that I drew, it just seemed like it was more air than I needed. And I just slowly just breathed less and less until I just reached this state where I'll say it's hard to describe, but it felt like I stepped into eternity and it felt like I left the shell, the simulation, so to speak, of like reality. And then I felt and experienced the real thing, whatever the real thing is. And it was outside of my body, outside of time, outside of space. And so it was a very hard experience to share, but it led to like a cessation of my ego for a temporary bit, just of associating with this kid, with this story, with these parents, with this school, with these grades and all this other stuff that I was just, every day that was me. And then for a while that just wasn't me anymore. And then it was actually quite distracting, to be a little kid and just have this like flashback or like think about these like deeper moments while you're, I don't know, playing dodgeball or something silly. And it led to like a huge disconnect, I think, between myself and my friends, my teachers, my sister, my parents, because there wasn't really like, it's almost like you're telling your parents you got abducted by aliens, right? It's like, it's just like, how do you explain that? And what's the words, to describe that? I even right now, I even have a hard time describing it. So, but yeah, that was like a series of many very interesting out of body experiences that I've had since then. And it just really led me down this path of trying to figure out what it is that I'm here to do or we're all here to do and how I fit in the world. And so that brings me to your podcast today.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Just to go back on a couple of things, because just, first of all, a lot of people aspire to get, transcendent, to be able to actually have that out of body experience as part of meditation. People practice and they may not get there. But to have that at the age of 13, as you said, then there became a level of, somewhat connection, but disconnection from, your sister and your parents and school. So what challenges does that bring up for you? Just because, at the age of 13, we're just not, I don't know. I don't want to use the word immature, but there's levels of maturity to be able to handle. Like at age of 13, you just, you're sort of somewhat coming into puberty. You're somewhat leaving, I suppose, junior school into high school. And there's all this stuff that's going on. So, what challenges you have to go through as part of that to try and sort of work out, how to navigate?
I was just starting to go into my rebellious phase. And so I was already looking for my own path. It was this weird juxtaposition of, when you're that age, you feel like you know the world and you know everything, but it's just like within the confines of your family and school. And at the same time, having this experience, knowing that like I know nothing pretty much. And so like I'm in this weird situation where like I start to feel alienated within myself because I don't have anybody to share this with. And I actually I did share it with a friend, but it was just like a very meaningless conversation. Like I told him what happened, and then he just like blinked, and then we moved on.
Right.
So that describes the experience for a very long time. That I think it just made me really lonely because it's such a profound experience. Yet there's nobody to share it with, And I think without that level of intimacy, without that level of sharing something that's so profound with somebody, and having them be able to reflect that experience and share like their perception of it, at least to be seen, was pretty damaging, I think. So I would say I was pretty depressed until like maybe about like 25 or so. So it took me, I mean, I wouldn't say it was just that. It was many things, like just my disconnection with my parents. Um, and then like from that, also not feeling like accepted at school. And then like just a lot of just, I think, um, I think it was mostly not being able to feel like I fit anywhere, because my parents, they come from Vietnam, and I grew up in California, and I was like the only one of two like Asian kids. And so not being quite American, not being quite Vietnamese, not being quite a normal little kid, and not quite being an adult. Like I just sat in this no man's land, and I kind of just had to figure everything out by myself. That's what it felt like, at least. So I think it was pretty lonely, because I felt like, I was always like either trying to be like a chameleon, or I was just trying to act like everybody else, even though I had this crazy experience that I knew that all this stuff was just a bunch of baloney, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word chameleon, because I guess I had on a couple of weeks ago a gay guy who grew up in rural Arkansas. Basically he said he had to play the same role because to a degree it was the same. Gay just not accepted in a Christian area of rural Arkansas, in that sort of family. So, what was some of the, so we talk about often, when we talk about the spiritual world and all the buzzwords and everything else, we talk about the masks we wear and these sorts of things. So was that something you had to start to revert to, because you knew that you sort of, you had this experience and you were different and there was something happening to you, but to fit in, you then had to say, hey, I'm going to be the sports guy or the academic guy or what happens to be. Did you start to go down that path of, that was the way I got friends and that's why I felt accepted?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just about how do you be seen when people are looking for, especially other males, other boys, other teens at that time, looking for little status symbols or sort of ways that they can evaluate you within some sort of hierarchy. And if you exist outside of that hierarchy, it's very hard for them to figure out what to do with you. Therefore, you will not make friends.
Yeah.
So I had to, decide I was going to be, this kid who liked hip hop music. Like Tupac was my role model. That I liked fast cars, and I just picked out, this avatar, right? This sort of character, that a collection of this identity of these things that were other people thought was cool or other people thought were respectable or admirable. And, that's how I built my life. And I think, probably a lot of people still do that. I think the more expectations we have, and then there's this idea of mimesis, right? Like, I forget his name, Rene something, but he just came up with this, he's a Frenchman, came up with this theory about like how everything that we want is just from somebody else's idea. And we just want it because somebody else wants it.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty much how I started to learn how to fit in. Was, let me just do what other people think is cool. And then I didn't really have my own identity for a really long time, because I really just wanted to strive to reach that peak that somebody else had set out there for me. Like whether that's like try to dunk a basketball or, whatever, being like a 4'6" kid, that was not possible.
I don't worry, I'm a height challenge, so I know exactly what that means. So on that point, and Jim Carrey's, I know people see him as a comedian, but he's got a new life as well. And recently I was watching something, and he just put it into very simple terms. That pretty much for him, depression is your body telling you that you're tired of playing a character of who you're not. And so we end up being just exhausted trying to play this character, and it's because we have to put it on every single day. So is that sort of something, as you spoke about, you probably, on reflection, you probably had a level of depression up until mid-20s. Was that just exhausting for you to have to go through that sort of process? I want to get back into your meditation practice, but I'd like to explore this a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, I'm totally open. We can talk about anything. I think it's akin to being lost at sea with no compass, because the compass or the North Star is what you know about yourself. And I would argue that there's no real knowledge outside of the knowledge that you have about yourself, because everything is a reflection of that. It's everything that we know is something in relation to who we are. Otherwise, like, there's no real relevance. The true relevance is to who we think we are. Whether that's an ephemeral thing or not, that's a whole different conversation. Yep. And so I think that during that period, being this chameleon who in one situation or one setting would act a certain way. Like, I had a friend who I grew up with, who he lived across the street from me. He ended up being a Confederate flag type of guy, let's say. He's one of my best friends, late best friend, though he has passed away. But around him and his group of friends, they would say all kinds of racist things about all the races, including Asians. But they'd be like, no, but Tim's cool though. And so like, but yeah. And so like, they would be like, saying all these like terrible things about people. And then, I wouldn't say anything because I'm not racist, but I wouldn't make it awkward. I would just laugh or whatever. Right. But, just things like that. I think just that when you're laughing at something that's not funny or truly just terrible, like, I think it does something to you. And so like, in each of these different types of contexts, whether it's laughing at things that are racist or aspiring to be the fastest driver on the street race or something, that things that just didn't matter to me, I think that does do something to you. I think that like chips away at your sense of esteem for who you are, because you're kind of forsaking who you are for this other thing that you deem that's more valuable outside of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that whole, and all the, as I was saying earlier, I've had many conversations with men, and I think one of the themes that does keep coming up is there's, the path that you probably discovered at the age of 13, or it was open to you to go, hey, maybe there's more about life and what's going on here. And then there's a path that everyone else actually expects us to go and do, to as you said, go and drive the fast car, go and be the sports person, go and be the academic, whether it be our parents, whether it be our friends. And so we end up playing this world to the point where I think that's where some men now are really lost, because they've moved so far away from that person that they were meant to be as a young child, with that creativity and that uniqueness and everything else, that they're now off in this world, and they've just filled the world with all these chameleon style, I suppose, distracting techniques. So now they'll go off and, they'll drink and they'll gamble, or, they'll do porn, or, they get embedded in local football teams, or they become that really, passionate supporter of certain sports teams and everything else, because that's the thing, because that helps them just completely stay away from maybe being willing to lose that friendship group along the way and go back and say, maybe there is a group that does accept me for who I am, as opposed to me trying to find that acceptance.
Yeah, I think you really hit on something there. It's that short-term sort of gratification, and then seeking things that make you happy, but they don't really fulfill you, because you look around and, your furniture even it's the style of something that's chic or modern at the time, but it's not something that really makes you happy. And then you look at that and you can't really enjoy it. And I think there's some level of that in your taste, in your discernment, that permeates through many other areas of your life that make life more deeply dissatisfying.
Yeah, definitely. So can we sort of move? So did you continue on, even though you had this experience? Did you then sort of go, hey, this meditation stuff's pretty cool, even though, I'm sort of, my friends don't really understand what happened, or that conversation. Did you continue on going back into that meditation practice, or did you sort of go, hey, I stopped it for a period and then jumped in later on?
Yeah, it's funny. You're saying earlier how people aspire to that, and so to have that sort of out of body experience. And I would say that I try to do that too. Just sit down. This is gonna be just like last time. I'm just gonna try to breathe slower. And no, nothing. Like I would try for weeks, days on end, and for much longer. But I would just end up frustrating myself because that's just not how you go about it. You're just seeking for this state, try to replicate all the same environments at the same time, and just all this foolishness. And so it was a huge distraction. I did get kicked out of middle school because I was sort of a bad boy, got in a lot of trouble. I wasn't a cool bad boy. I was just somebody who got in a lot of trouble. I got like suspended from the school buses a lot, suspended from school, lots of fights and stuff. And my parents tried to send me off to like a Buddhist boarding school. And then they sent me to like a Buddhist retreat where I would learn how to meditate. And so I did learn how to meditate formally. And then since then, I've been practicing meditation on a pretty regular basis. There was a lot of, I think when I was really young, I think I was about 8 or 9, I think 8. I had my first lucid dream. I wanted to be this Power Ranger really bad. I wanted to be the Green Ranger. And I went through the dream and I was like, I don't know, the Blue Ranger or something. I was like, I don't want. And then like I just forced myself to go back and be the Green Ranger. And then that's when I realized I could lucid dream. And that just became a recurring thing. So between like the lucid dreaming and this type of meditation that occasionally I would have out of body experiences, I would see things, I would travel outside of my body. I would say I took it for granted for most of my high school years until I was about 22 or 23. And this is when like the new age movement was starting to get big. So this is all this stuff about Eckhart Tolle and what's some other guy with the being present or something like that. And then the verbiage started coming out to explain these experiences that I was experiencing, that other people could experience them and they had experienced them. And there was, these basically manuals on what to do and how to be. And then that got me deeper into it because the language that we have is so important in how we experience something. And when we don't have the language to describe something or the framework to really look at a situation or an experience, it's ineffable. And when it's ineffable, it lives in the ether and it can never be touched. And that's the interesting thing about when you learn, like I've learned maybe 3 or 4 languages, and there are certain expressions that you can have in a different language that it can't even come close to a different language. But it's because that expression is so key to that culture that it really speaks to something in the human soul or consciousness. And it's just, yeah. So I think language is so important and so key in describing these types of situations. And I think the English language is pretty good. I think scientifically, I think it's very good at breaking things down to a granular level, but I think it leaves something to be desired for more romantic aspects and more, even we say like energetic principles.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't speak any other languages. It's although, I'm aware of Sanskrit, and there is words in Sanskrit that describes certain things and they're just non-translatable into an English language because I think you're right. A lot of the ancient, older languages from way back actually described a feeling and described an emotion. But I think our English language is all about trying to describe the logic. We have to have this logic view, this scientific view and how it actually works. And yeah, so I agree. There's aspects within the English language where, you just can't put words to it. But even like how we go about, like how parts of our brain work, right? Like the very core of our brain, the experiential part of our brain, it doesn't have words. That's what's tapped into all the feelings. And that's where you can actually just have this great emotion. People go, hey, you're feeling, go, well, I can't really describe it because you can't, because you can't describe a feel. We try to put words around it, but we can't actually, get to that point and actually describe it. For me, I've looked a lot into, like the masculine archetypes and everything else. And I'm now actually getting a deeper understanding of like the lover archetype, which is that pure ability just to see things for as they are rather than having to describe them or to actually interpret them or be able to, actually, just go through that whole, or as you mentioned before, hierarchy them. Like that thing just is. It has its own essence. It has its own beauty. It has its own scent, and it just, you can't really describe it. Or you could botanically want to describe like a flower, right? But then that takes away the whole essence of what that flower is and its role in the I suppose our systems and how our ecosystems and all that work. So, yeah, I'm getting more and more aligned into that space, I suppose.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. That's quite enlightening. I haven't really. This is actually the first time I've talked about language in this way on a podcast, or just in general, really. And I think it just points to the fact that it's like, I think that's what was important for martial arts for me, because there was something in martial arts that in the form of the movement and how to describe the movement that isn't in spoken language. It's almost like a dance. And I think a dance is more universal relatable, where you have something that's more groovy, you have something that's more sharp. And, we can talk about these energetic characteristics of these movements, but they also exist not just in the physical plane, but they can exist, emotionally, socially, mentally, and spiritually. And we just, without the words and the language to really put these experiences together, or a shared common language. Because if you and I were to have like a deep conversation, I don't know, about philosophy or something, we'd have to start with maybe like 20 minutes or 10 minutes of just definitions, of just making sure we're on the same page, right? Yeah. And so when it comes to just having these conversations about the profound, what could be quote unquote the ineffable, it would be really hard to use just our shared common English language to get to that. So there is something really special about language that I will meditate on this evening.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the challenge we have is that I think there's a movement to try to move away. Like, some of the old ancient languages in China and everything else just aren't spoken anymore, and in various areas because, they're shutting down provinces and all these sorts of things. And so, even in some of the Indian, and I like here in Australia, there was 250 plus mobs that made up this land that we lived in, right? People sort of forget that this was like equivalent to Europe. This was all these different mobs that lived here. Each one of them had a different language. Now there was some shared commonality in some of those language things, but now you look around and most of nearly 80% of that language has disappeared because there's that whole, I don't know, fear, but some of that language, again, some of the words cannot be translated into English because they described a totality, and I like words that just describe a totality. Like one word just says, I'm summing all this up in that word. And when someone says a word, people feel and know what that word means without having to be descriptive. And yeah, it's sad that we're moving away from that piece as well, I reckon.
It would be cool if we, instead of, moving away from that into English, we moved away from that into telepathy.
Yeah, that would be so cool. I mean, one of the great, and you touched on martial arts and different things, around the movement. It's, I've tried varying things. And one of the ones that I did try for a period of time was Tai Chi. And
nice.
I just really loved it. And, it's just that whole purity in the simplicity of the movement, but the complexity in the movement all at the same time in that smoothness and just trying to get to that. And after doing the 45 minutes or an hour, you realized you thought about nothing. You walked away and go, what was I thinking in that? And you go, I actually did not, there was no voice in my head. There was no chatter. There was nothing going on. It was just pure presence in the movement with connecting with this smoothness of the movement of my body and probably getting it completely wrong, but it was right for me at those sorts of things. And again, I think for me, that goes back to our society is so fast and wants to move at such a speed. And some of these practices, I think that's why people really struggle with of slowing down and doing a Qigong, a Tai Chi, other forms of martial arts, and meditation practice, because it's like, I don't have time for this. But it's interesting how you can create time by doing those practices.
Yes, 100%. And I think with Tai Chi, since you have that frame of reference, one of the things that I studied. And what is interesting about it is, since it's a meditation in movement, that there are certain, I would say, first principles that can be taken from that experience that are directly transferable to other aspects of reality, just in terms of movement, in terms of expression, in terms of distance, in terms of proprioception, in terms of interoception. And there's these subtle level ups that you get as you spend time in that translate over to just your normal daily life, checking in at work, saying hi to your partner and your friends. Like, there's an evenness that I think when somebody practices something like Tai Chi, that your mind transforms a little bit, and you become more calm, you become more even, you become more like, maybe like water, or however somebody would describe it.
I mean, the other one that I've been doing recently, which I've got to get back into a little bit more, is learning the didgeridoo. So basically, that's and that was from a local elder who was actually teaching me how to play that. And again, for that period of time, and we use his style rather than the very fast style, is actually based on a very low drone meditation style. So it's actually getting some very low, long sounds and everything coming out. And again, when you're sitting there, just got this sound and everything, particularly if you're two or three of you around together playing, it's a similar experience, that all you are is you are there connected to the music. And as I said, I think you said telepathy, but that's the thing about it. When you play music with other people, I think you move into a level of telepathy, because you start to feel what they're playing. You're not just listening to it, but you actually can start to feel that movement of the change of tone and the change of vibration and the change of what's happening around you. And if you're really tapped in, you can actually just adapt to a level of that telepathy, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think what's so cool about it is that it's already something that exists within us. I don't think that there's a separation between either you've had it or you haven't had it. And that's something that I find most of my life in my waking state, that I am sort of in this little slip space of the sweet spot of being like in tune and present with everything, but still like in this dance. And you can see it in sports too. I was playing flag football. I learned how to play that, and I learned how to play basketball recently too. And there is something about when everybody is sort of in the zone, and we're all synced, and we kind of know what's going on. We know this person's tendencies, and everything just happens almost as if it's on its own when you're all on the same frequency. That's, I think, whether that's music, it's a human, I think it's a fundamental human experience that does allow us to step outside of our normal everyday concerns, everyday considerations, so that we have a chance to, I think, like channel or tap into divine, just being an observer of that improvisation that just happens to just work out perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I know that you're into a term called flow state. And I think that's sort of a similar down that path about, that flow state. And you see like LeBron James, it's, 50, 60 points. They just go, he was in flow on that night. And you can see like professionals or different people, they just find their way that they can just drop into this almost zoned in, uninterruptible, perceptive place. Like they just know where the ball is going to come from. They just know on the court where the other people are, and so they can, when teams are in that flow state, it's like, everything just as if they're operating as one. Is that something that you do and you're into and that you work with other people on?
It definitely is a core component of my life. It was such a core component that I didn't realize that I just forgot that it's not exactly a normal experience. That I think because I have done so much work on myself, what can say, I don't really have negative thoughts or automatic negative thoughts or self-recursive thoughts. I don't like look in the mirror and focus on any specific thing, or when I look at myself in the mirror, just this piece of flesh. But I know that some people, when they look in the mirror, they focus on their maybe negative, something about their face. I could talk about this mole on my face. Oh, this ugly thing is looking back at me or something. And I think it kind of spoils reality a little bit when there are little things that remind you of other little things that you don't like. And I think that's what takes us out of being in the flow. And some of it, it could be trauma, or some of it could just be a strong preference or dislike. But each of those times that we have those experiences, especially if it's related to something that will take us into a fight or flight state, we lose that half a beat, or just that moment where the rest of the time, if we look at it as like a sheet of music, it's still going. Now we're just like half a beat behind, and we're trying to catch up. And so for me, a lot of my work has been in just sharing my direct experience in a space where I use neurolinguistic programming, some hypnosis techniques to really reflect. And I think this is probably something that I didn't get when I was younger, after that transcendental meditation experience, I guess. And as we're putting all this together, is I didn't have a chance to be seen and reflected on a level that I felt was appropriate. And what I mean by that is, in that moment when I told that kid, my friend, and he just kind of blinked at me and we moved on, that was the basically not being seen, right? And I think there's a level of profoundness that I have that I can share with people in the space, that I help bring out something within themselves. Because I think meditation, part of it is just looking with clarity. And one of the descriptions that the Buddha used was when you look in a mirror, meditation is just like that. And each time you meditate, it's sort of like clearing the mirror so you can see yourself. And I think when you and I, or anybody talks to one another, we are sort of reflections of each other, except the people who have more, say, projections, automatic negative thoughts and things like that. It's harder for them to reflect. And it's more of their stuff that comes up in the way of an actual direct connection. And so I think one of the things that I've been endowed with is just, maybe since I've been doing this for so long, is that like I can hold a really clean space with free of any projections and anything like that. And it's not about what I want or anything like that. It's just really just, how do we grow this reflection and allow you to see what you are and how beautiful that is, and how inspiring and how impactful and how powerful that is as a being. And it's very transformative. So usually, 2-3 hour sessions, it's a big transformation. So it's very exciting for me.
No, I love that. I love that. I mean, I see my role as a coach, not that I'm not the healer. Like, my role as a coach is to just help people understand the layers that over years that they, either them or their parents, or they've allowed to be put in front of them. Like, they've just built up the shield, and I'm like, exactly that. It's just a mirror saying, so today we get to see this part of the shield. So they can actually remove that. And the next day, as a mirror, they get to see that part of the shield in front of them, and then slowly just help them go on the journey of slowly moving. It's like these little building blocks that they put up front of them, can just move them out one by one until they get to the point where they can actually get back and see the true essence of who they are and the powerful person they are, and, the infinite possibilities that they have in front of them that were removed by putting up walls, due to try to be, I wasn't seen, so therefore I had to feel safe. So how do I feel safe? So I put up another barrier, and then I block myself off again, because that person was seen as the weird kid, or that person was seen as the unloved kid. So I don't want that anymore. And it's just like, no, it's okay. We can come all the way back. And I just go back to the very basic essence that, and I'll put aside, I'll past life and ancestral, carrying on into our soul in this life. But at the point we're born, we are just pure to a degree. And then it's that 0 to 7 where things start to get added onto us, and we get, asked to be moved away from where we are or what we could actually do. I have a question for you, which the one thing I sort of see, I hear a lot of people say this, I can't meditate. I'm no good at meditating, and I know this is probably isn't your only practice, but I'd love to get your views on, what do you see as meditation? How would you suggest to men or other people to say, hey, here's something you do, or this is what you're going to get out of a meditation practice, or, this is what being able to accept meditation to look like?
Yeah, I think there are two types of meditation. If we use the framework, and I think this is what's beautiful about using frameworks from other cultures too. So this framework is sort of this yin yang framework of masculine or feminine, or contracting or expansion. And so there are two main, I think, types of meditation. The expanding is just a release type of meditation. You're just surrendering. It's sort of this non-focused meditation. Whatever arises, allow it to arise, don't follow it, that sort of thing. And then you have this other kind where it's very directly focused, anchored to some type of practice, whether that's monitoring your breathing, whether it's holding a certain type of cadence with your breathing or something like that. So I think they both they take you down the same path, except I would say that the ones that are, we can say, more the doing type, or, with the cadence or some type of anchor. Sometimes I think that kind, in the long run, if we're talking about compounding over years, I think it can lead to some types of, let's say, side quests. Because you might have a divine realization, you might have a transcendental experience, except it doesn't really, in the ultimate truth of the, in the entire span of your life, it's not going to change your life that much. Like it's really just a big distraction. Although it's true in its essence, and nobody can ever take away a direct experience that you have. At the same time, it's not something you have control over. And oftentimes when people have these types of, whether you could just be like a manifestation meditation, right? So you spend your time doing this manifestation meditation. So you get a bunch of stuff or whatever, you program your reticular activating system to start noticing certain types of things, and you're more in tune with those things. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that makes us happiest is probably opening up the degrees of freedom in which we can behave and respond with the environment. And that has a lot to do with the level of presence that we have with that environment. Because the more that we're able to receive the environment, and that's like the level of presence, then the more we can have this interplay with it. Except when we have this extremely rigid sense of who we are, then we are not as free to have this boyhood little high pitched laugh, or, whatever it is, because there's so much judgment. There's so much, I can't do this, I can't do that. People, what do they think of me? And then, I'm so important and stuff. And so I think the other kind allows us to release so let's talk about your question here. Is like, people say they're not good meditators or they have trouble meditating. I think the problem there is people are so used to doing. And so those types of meditations that have an anchor is a doing type of meditation. And the other kind is a do nothing type of meditation. And that is difficult for people. So it's sometimes, I would say, the bridge is to do something type of meditation. Focusing on breathing. Zazen is a good one. You can just count to 10 with each breath. Inhale, exhale, that's 1, 2, and then all the way to 10 and then reset. And if you notice you went to 12, obviously you weren't paying attention. So a self-corrective mechanism. You have some feedback there. And then once you have that feedback, you can get into flow by just kind of monitoring that process. So that is one way, just leaning into that doingness. I think the other way is really important, because when you're talking about the archetypes, one of the archetypes is the magician, and the magician is able to change spaces, I think. So you have the liminal space, and then you have the subliminal space, and then you just have the profane space. And so there are all these different types of spaces that exist within our dimension, except for how we behave in a certain space. And maybe in a sacred space or something, you behave differently. And so what if you already create these spaces within yourself? Well, it takes some time, right? Like if I'm going to build a house, I need to figure out what the foundation is going to be and all this other stuff. And so when we do a do nothing type of meditation, you're exploring this inner space and seeing what's there. What can you observe with your eyes, and, what kind of experiences are coming up? What is your mind telling you? Yeah. It's today is Saturday and Sunday. You got to go somewhere. You got to meet this person. All those things, they'll start to die down. But if you let them, and then once you let them, then other things will come up, more deep, more profound things. And as you just sit and become more comfortable with that, then you enter different dimensions of yourself. I say looking behind the curtain or looking under the hood, because you don't know your inner workings until you take a moment to allow them to open up in front of you. And once you do, then you see all the mechanisms and what's working for you, what's not working for you. And then you can create some space. And each time that you spend, the more time you spend in that, those empty beats, the more space you start to develop for what can ultimately be like love for yourself, appreciation for yourself, and what's working and what's not working. And it's not really a place to judge yourself. It's really just a place to allow what is to be, so that you can see yourself more clearly. Because the more that we want to say that we like this part of ourselves, or this set of stories, or this collection of identities, and don't like these parts of ourselves, a part of ourselves that was bullied and abused and this and that, like they're all part of our story. And if we have some type of attachment, or we have some type of aversion to it, then it just takes us away from the truth of it all. And that takes us away from those degrees of freedom, or this level of presence, that we can have this level of being okay with accepting what is in the normal waking state. And so I would say the ideal type is probably, for most people, is just to create the type to learn how to create space within yourself, so that you can be okay with just whatever life throws at you, that you know that you're resilient, you know that you're robust, because you've went over these experiences and you've created the time and the space for yourself to process them. But if that doesn't work out, you can always do those types of meditations that you focus on, some type of anchor. Vipassana is a good style for that type of meditation as well.
Yeah, no, cool. Really appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. Can I ask you, before I go into a comment, do you use music or no music when you meditate, just out of interest?
I can meditate to anything. So, I mean, there are, like, I guess in the morning, I just do this thing with the timer. It hits a bell, and then that's it. But if I'm boxing, say I was just sparring about 2 hours ago, and I turn on this one song that I have, it's a trigger to my flow state. It's one of the techniques that you can use to get yourself into flow. And when I listen to the song, whether it's I'm working or whether I'm fighting or whatever, my mind is automatically starting to tune into this other space, this frequency. And I can step outside of myself, and I can leave everything behind and just go into that, slip into that space. And so I don't really have a preference. I think once you do enough, anything can be a meditation. Even just this conversation is a meditation, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look back years back when I was at school and studying. And I've always found this is I used to have music on, but the music was to block out the background noise. And then I had the ability to block out the music. So when that music went on, like there was that music and it might be playing, and then I could be in a state where I may not have even listened to a song for 20 minutes. And then you come out and go, oh, the radio's still on, because it actually was this thing. And I've always found that I'm the same with that for me, I have the ability to, if I'm meditating, there's a certain song, it goes for about 40 odd minutes that I'll listen to, but I know that I can use that, and I'll know the thoughts will come in and out, and I'll start to generate early. But then as I go deeper, the thoughts slow down, as you're saying, and they start to disappear. And then I just get lost in time. And then then you might come out and go, oh, I can hear that tune again. And then, and then you drop in again, and then there's nothing. And then you're right. You're off in this different space, and, whether it be flying through mountains or whatever happens to be, and these great experiences. Next thing you know, there's a chant at the end of the song. Go, oh, actually that 45 minutes went quicker than I expected. The first 5 minutes feels like this is going to be a long time. You're sitting down, you're not comfortable. You've just woken up. You're sort of trying to work your way through. And then, you just got to maybe sit down, and I think there's a little bit of that persistence and resilience when you start to meditate as well. It's like, I often say, I think there's a level of arrogance that we can have is to go, I can sit down and expect I can do a 45-minute meditation, tomorrow. If I haven't done the practice all the way, there's a bit of arrogance that I can drop into it. It's like, no, it's a practice. Like, it's like me going out saying I could shoot 100% 3-pointers, right, without having picked up a basketball. Like every 6 months I could go and just shoot. Like you're not going to be able to do it. Right? It's so people need to understand these are practices, and over time you adapt to it and you adjust to it and you get better at it and you become more calm at it. And and you're right. Then it starts to come in. Like I've got to the point now, if I'm on a plane and I put on that 45-minute thing, I can just zone out on the plane and just meditate. which is cool. So yeah, you get to your mind has that little trigger point, I think, that picks up on certain songs, and as you said, can help you drop into a flow state.
It's like those old dial type of radios where you're picking the station 107.8 or whatever, and I think there's all this noise until you get there, until you find it, like that static free part. And I think a lot of meditation sort of could be considered like that. And I think intelligence could be described that way too. Is like, what do you focus on? Like, given this huge landscape, or this conversation, what part of this conversation do I focus on? Do I build on, and what parts do I allow just to sit in the back and develop? And I think in a way we're developing a relationship with what we focus on, and through that, I think we can become more intelligent through meditation. Because we're working on just going through this radio dial of like, what's the right frequency, where do I want to be, and then just allowing the music to play, and then maybe you go on a different radio station or something like that, and you don't let other people dictate what radio station you are, and you kind of just figure out exactly how to tune your brain for the right type of. And then I don't know if you've heard of the Muse or those other biofeedback type of devices where they actually literally help you attune your brain to certain types of frequencies or states. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting.
So thanks for your time, but I want to ask you a couple of questions before we close off, if that's okay. This could be the $1 million question. Having been through what you've been through, what is your purpose in life? Have you got a view now about your purpose, where you're heading, and what life looks like for you?
Yeah, I think I think we all have many purposes. I would say my purpose right now that I'm most focused on, other than having so much fun with life and sharing so much love with everybody that's around me, is to build a flow state training company that's international. I think that with the amount of innovation that we've unlocked as a society when it comes to nuclear fusion, which was something that was recently released, or somebody got a Nobel Prize for it last year. And then we have AI going rampant this year and part of last year as well. There's just so much leverage that we have, except for we don't have the wisdom and we get in our own way. And that's sort of this idea that we can't cooperate with each other. We operate in silos and we're disconnecting and we're disconnected. And so I think the key for humanity at this point, with World War III brimming and all this other weird stuff happening, is that we learn to see other people's perspective and how to connect with others. Because I think as soon as we can do that, then that opens the door for innovation, basically for cooperation, which is, I think, as a species, our most incredible gift. And so, because right now I don't think we're able to access that because of just where we're at in society. And I think I just want to be the facilitator, if I can, or some sort of catalyst. I have a lot of business knowledge. I've operated in multiple businesses, sold them, scaled them, but I've never done anything like this. So this will be quite a challenge for me. But I'm developing a really solid team. I have really solid contacts of people that I'm ready to add in as soon as we're ready to. And so I'm really excited to just connect people with the flow state. I believe that flow state is probably the highest level of fulfillment that we can experience. It's correlated higher than pleasure in a lot of studies. And so I think that I want to open up the door for infinite leverage through cooperation, through connecting to technology. And I think that we can do that through experiencing flow state in one domain and then opening it up to our entire life.
Beautiful. I love that. It's all the best for that, because if you can achieve that along the way through, that's just going to make this world a better place. Because all the terms you touched on about this segregation and disconnection and separation and judgment, all excuses to be able to hierarchy myself outside of other people and everything else. Is just if we can start to break that down and get it back to we are all just one, and we actually we don't have to compete anymore. We don't have to have this, we don't have to live in comparison. We don't have to live in competition. In fact, we could actually go through a win-win-win exercise with everybody. And, if we
Yeah.
all saw that as a viewpoint, then we could actually be in a much better place.
Yes, you get it. That's 100%. Yeah. We're on the same page. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what my business is about as well. It's about, I have a whole section in my program, which is about judgment versus inquiry and why we spend judging and why we're in competition and how we can remove that and how much simpler life becomes when you're there to actually help and raise someone else, as opposed to try to climb on top of them so you can actually take the next step up. And so much more fulfillment in that space, and a lot more internal happiness comes out of that because you know what you've actually done. The last question that I do want to ask you is, this is about men, and you've been great in talking about your journey and the challenges you had as a young guy, and pretty much been suspended from school and everything else. So, and you've also touched on elements around, that's in the past. Am I attaching to the past, or am I actually now able to, live in the present and know that that was a part of my journey, but it's not who I am? So what would be a message for men or, that are out there listening to this, that you could drop in there to help them maybe transcend as to where they are with some of their challenges to, be more present in their life?
It's a really deep question, and I won't be able to do it justice, but I'll try. I think one of the things that modern society has afforded us is incredible amounts of luxury. And we can talk about like the Mercedes Benz. I don't mean that kind of luxury. I mean, just the fact that I can go down the street and have this beautiful Japanese cheesecake that my ancestors never would have been able to taste. And there's a problem with that. And I think the problem is fundamentally, I don't think our taste buds are tuned and designed. This is just a small analogy, but they're designed for us to optimize what would be most nutrient dense for us, but it's not necessarily what we should be eating all the time. And I think oftentimes our senses misguide us, and because of the modern luxuries that we live in. And so I think the way to combat that is really to understand ask ourselves, what have we earned in our life? And when you earn something, there's a relationship that you have to it. Not only that you're grateful for it, but also that you fully understand what that thing is, because to earn it, you would have had to understand what that thing is. And so like an example I could say is when you're 16 or 15 or whatever, you get your driver's license, you now have the power to basically manslaughter, just run people over. Right. And you have no ethics, no, you're 15, but that's the power you have. And now we have these people that are 30, 40, 50, they can push a button and launch a nuclear missile, right? And there's no connection to the incredible amount of power that we've been afforded, even with technology or anything. And so I think whatever we think that is most central to who we are, in terms of technology, whether that's the car, or the computer, the internet, whatever it is really understanding that without a relationship where we earn something, and I don't just mean earn it because you can pay for it, but earn it in the sense of really deeply understanding it. If it's so core to your lifestyle, when you earn it, there's a rite of passage that automatically happens. That earning, that understanding, that knowledge, that wisdom, that will, I think, allow us to have a proper relationship with it. And what I mean proper is you have certain neurochemicals that are firing as as you're interacting with whatever that thing is. And that happens to be dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, because you feel like you earned it, because you have a relationship with it, because you appreciate on a really deep level. And I think it's so easy to make a bunch of money and buy a bunch of stuff and not be attached, have a relationship with any of this stuff, and your life still is the same. And I think the problem is just that we don't have that deep level of connection with earning things. So I think because we grow up in this time without a rite of passage, I think if you're Jewish, maybe you have this bar mitzvah, or if you're Mexican, you have the quinceañera, but there's not really a lot of rites of passages for men amongst other men. And I think seeking out actually men who you aspire to be like or respect, to sort of work out what the rites of passages would be. Hey, what do you think? The next milestone, this is where I'm at. What do you think? And then so you have that relationship with life where you're earning things along the way. It just, I think, really changes, because without that, men, especially men, I think part of our role is to lead. And I think it goes back to this yin yang thing, right? And the yang of it is to know where you're going and to lead with a sense of certainty, which leads to confidence. And anything that's not within that realm of certainty that's been earned, it's just maybe foolishness or cockiness. And it will ultimately lead to our dissatisfaction with whatever's happening in our lives or around us. So I think just really just dialing this whole little tidbit that I just brought up is just being able to earn our rites of passage through life and really developing a sincere relationship with those things, with people even that are around us that allow us to be who we are today.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think you've touched on some really key elements in there, particularly around the lack of or loss of rites of passage for men. Because, yeah, I think so many things a number of things come quite easy to people, like they've had ready access to things. This whole thing that, my generation will be better off and my previous generation was just better than previous generation, like always make it a bit better. But the question is, are we truly making it better? Are we actually making it better, or are we actually making that life so much easier that that person didn't have to, as you said, earn it themselves? And it's not going out, getting a job and earning the money. It's actually the experience and the, having dealt with some of those things or gone through that deeper, I suppose, healing and everything to go through to be able to come out and be what I'd call a grounded man, as opposed to, probably a shadow man, or men dressed up as boys or boys dressed up as men, which I think we see a lot in society now. So, yeah, thanks for that. I really love how you put that together. Thanks, Tim. Thank you for your time. I've really loved this conversation. It's very close to me in where my journey is in relation to that, just being present, accepting disconnection from society. So, I find it's really funny. I'm in a situation where it's not that I don't care in what I do and how I go about doing something, because, there's a sense of achievement and pride, but I also know that, my 80 odd years here on this earth compared to the 80 billion years it's been here, it's very small and it's quite insignificant. And, whether that thing happened or not actually doesn't make a bigger difference in the larger picture. And trying to navigate in that society. So it's good to have these conversations with someone else who's, in a similar path, and sort of, it's great. So thank you.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, the depth that we've had, and just the sort of how we just improvise and built on each other's, what we shared. I got a lot out of it, and I'm really grateful to you for creating this space, for creating this podcast, for inviting me on it. So thank you.
No, thanks, man. You have a beautiful Friday evening. Go and enjoy whatever dinner you're going to have, or try and stay away from that Japanese cheesecake, maybe. So have a great evening. It's been awesome chatting to you, Tim, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Thanks, mate.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Hey, folks, it's that was Tim. What an awesome chat we had with Tim along the way through. I really enjoyed that because, I felt a lot of connection into where Tim's at, and a lot of similarities where I am on my journey in my life. So, that's why I love getting on the different men into the podcast and having the chat. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I'll put all the links as to where you can find about Tim and his flow state and the business he's actually operating. And I'd suggest if anyone around the globe that wants to tap into Tim, I think you're not going to go wrong by working with him in the future. So that's a wrap for episode 71 of the Unearthed Man podcast. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Sending you much love and peace, Steve.